Hello and welcome to Wolfridge Woodworking. Today we are going to be turning a small bowl. It is made out of Bubinga. It started as a square blank and I cut it down on my circle cutting jig. It measures 5.5 inches wide and 2 inches deep. So it's relatively small bowls. But I've been trying to work on smaller bowls just to get started. I think the biggest one I've made is maybe 6 inches wide, and you know, in my mind at least, I'm starting with smaller bowls. It should be the same turning a larger bowl, but I don't know. It's just a mental block, and I'm trying to work up to larger bowls. So stay tuned. There will be bigger bowls coming, but today we're going to turn this piece of Bubinga. It's a beautiful wood. I've turned another piece of a Bubinga. So let's get started. I want to talk a little bit about shop safety. One of the most important things that you can take care of is your eyes and your lungs. So today, while I'm turning this piece of Bubinga, I'll be turning it using a face shield, and that's just to protect my eyes from injury. As I go to sanding, I'll be also wearing a face mask. And so we're going to true it up, and then we're going to start forming the bottom of the bowl and getting the shape and putting a mortise in it so I can reverse it in my chuck. That way I can start doing the hollowing the inside of the bowl. So we're going to be turning this around 800 RPMs. There are formulas for this, but I usually go by feel and cut. If I find that it's gouging material out, I know that either my sharps or my tools are dull, which they should not be right now, or the lathe is turning too slow. So I want to make sure that I'm watching the speed and making sure that the speed matches the size of the wood that I've got, and I'm getting a clean cut. The other thing that I am going to be using is my Easy Wood tools. Not a sponsored video, but it's something I'm using as a carbide cutter. In a later video I'm going to show you how I sharpen these. This is pretty sharp, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Turn the lathe on, bring the speed up, make sure that my tool rest is close but not touching. And then also make sure that what I like to do is my tool is about a little bit below halfway. So I'm going to bring the tool rest down a little bit. And I'll be adjusting this as I go. And just make sure that it's away from and not hitting. And now I'm just going to square this up and make it true. And turn it off and see what it's doing. It's looking pretty round now. So I'm going to move around and start shaping the bottom, and I'm actually going to true up the edge. It should be pretty good, but I'm just going to true that up. So I'm just going to turn my rest around. And again, I'm just going to be slightly below center. Okay. So now that I've got that, I need to cut a mortise into here. To accept my chuck. It's usually around 2 inches. So what I'll do is I'll mark center. So let me bring the rest up to closer to the center point. You can see there's a little dot about right there. And I'm gonna grab a parting tool. Okay, that's where my center mark is, and my chuck is about 2 inches wide. I'm going to grab a ruler
and mark from that center point out 1 inch. Okay. And I'm just going to put the pencil up, manually spin the lathe. There's my circle for my mortise. So I'm just going to take a parting tool and dig that out a little bit so I can get it wide enough to take my carbide cutter. Okay, that should be wide enough for me to get in with my carbide cutter. So the tool wrist is a little high, so I'm just going to lower it. And I'm just using the detail tool, and I just make a groove and then kind of ease it over with the edges just very gently. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the bottom. So to make that bottom, I usually typically put a small foot because from what I saw other people doing is you don't want it to sit completely flush on the bottom. The reason is over time it may warp a little bit, and if you depend on the whole bottom to sit level, it may not work. Where if you put a small foot or a smaller footprint, it will actually be a lot more stable. So what I'm going to do, I never know exactly what I'm going to, how I'm going to finish the bowl. All I know is I've got a piece of wood, and it's funny to hear somebody say, but the wood does talk to you, so the design does change a little bit over as I start to turn the wood. So I'm going to continue on, and I'm just going to start to form this bottom. I'm going to switch over now to my round carbide cutter to start taking off this edge here and do a little bit more smoothing of the side, because the end grain here is a little rough. It's smooth here, but where the end grain is, it gets a little rough. So you've got to take lighter cuts to be able to smooth that out. So I'm just going to continue on. Divide this into thirds and maybe put a shape. So maybe start here and then come in like that. So, oops, finish it off. All right, so I'm just going to take this material off here to get a really good curve, and then start taking some material off here with this third, and then this will actually be the foot. See what that looks like. Oh yeah, it looks better. Still a little bit more end grain here. So what I think I might do is switch over to one of my round nose scrapers. So it's a round nose scraper, so it's just going to get a little bit more of a finishing cut on it. Still got a sharp edge to it, so it should be good, but before I go to my next project, I think I will sharpen it, but it's got a good edge on it now. So I'm just going to try to get some of this end grain to be smoother. So what that's like. Oh, much better, much better. So as you can see, I did make a little bit of a mistake. I did not make this bigger, but that's okay, not a big deal. It's still on the lathe. So I just off camera made this expanded a little bit bigger and actually added another decorative ring underneath there. That's the only thing that I did. So now I'm going to move on to sanding. I'll go into a time lapse for that. I will take it through and come and tell you kind of in between each step what grits I'm using and things like that, so that you're aware. So I'm going to start with 150 grit. I'm going to be using my, I don't know if this is a bowl sander or it's just it's a rotary sander that spins and it just keeps my hands from heating up when I start sanding. So that was 150 grit. So now I'm going to move up from 150 grit and go up to 220 grit, and I'm finally going to go up to 320, and then I'll eventually wet sand with some walnut oil at 400. So after I finish sanding, I come back and I clean it with denatured alcohol. And then I come back with sanding sealer. I use Mylan's cellulose sanding sealer that I've cut in half with denatured alcohol. I just put them in these little cans. That makes them a little bit easier, or should I say plastic bottles. Makes it a lot easier than trying to open the metal cans all the time. So I'm just going to rub it down. I usually do that with the lathe stopped. And I'm just going to rub it down with some denatured alcohol to clean it up, and then I'll come back with my sanding sealer and do that. So just going to put a little bit of denatured alcohol on the rag. Come up here. It's going to raise the grain a little bit. Some people I've seen go through and sand it again. I used to do that, but I found that this just works just as well, because I'm going to come back and do a wet sand afterwards. This just kind of gets some of that dust off of it, just to clean it up. So then there's that, and I'm just using just a shop towel. Shake up my sanding sealer, squirt some on my rag, and then I just rub it in with the lathe stopped. I'm going to switch over and sand with it's wet dry. I think they use it like for the auto industry, but it's wet dry. It's usually the black stuff from what I've seen, and then I'm going to use it's Mahoney's walnut oil, and I'm just going to wet sand it in that, and then I will be finishing in this beeswax kind of feeding wax. It's got beeswax, orange oil, and I know I'm not going to say it right, but carnauba wax. So it's got 3 different ingredients in it. Puts a nice semi-gloss finish, between semi-gloss and a matte finish. So that's what I'm choosing to do with this today. So as you can see, it's got a really nice finish. That's 600 with the walnut oil. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a clean rag. I'm going to shake up my beeswax mix here and apply that with the lathe standing still. Just apply it gently, or what's the word I'm looking for? Generously. That's the word. So just apply the finish generously. So now I have it turned around and it's in my chuck in the reverse mode. You can see the holes that were holding down my face plate. Let's see. This is a 3-inch, give or take, face plate. So now I have the tool rest turned around. It's close, but not touching the bowl. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this a little bit more straight. It's got a little bit of a wobble into it, but not very much. I'm going to raise the tool rest up a little bit because I want the cutter edge to be about where center is. And I went too high there. So I'm going to lower it a little bit. Maybe a little bit more. Because what you'll find is there's a little nib that develops when you start scraping the bottom of the bowl. And if you don't have that where that cutting edge is there in the center of the bowl, it's really hard to get that nib out. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the lathe on, and we're going to come up to about 1,000 RPM. We'll start there and we'll see how the cuts go. I'm going to start with my my square carbide cutter. It just gets a better edge. First thing I'm going to do is decide where I want the edge to be, the wall thickness. Again, there's no hard and fast rule. It's personal choice, or personal taste, I should say. So I'm going to go about there. And that's where I will cut to. So that is about 1/4 of an inch. And you know, you can go thinner. You know, once you get done, you can always go thinner. You can't add wood back, as they say. So that's where my wall thickness is going to be. Do my best to try and keep a consistent wall thickness all the way around. So I've got the wall thickness where I want, and it's blended pretty well. I'm pretty close to the bottom of where I want. And now I want to work on this transition between the wall and the bottom. I want to kind of even that out, and then I'll come back and make some really light passes to clean up that edge. A lot of times too, what you can see is when the lathe is turning, you can actually see the lines, and as you apply a little bit of pressure on the tool, you'll see those lines go away. Still feel like I got a little ridge right there, so just want to get that down a little bit more. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset my tool rest a little bit, straighten it out, and try to, I'm going to round over this lip so that it's a little more pleasing. Let's get that going. Again, just not much, just taking that sharp edge off and rounding it. And I think that's good. So let me get my my right or my left-handed scraper. So this is just a scraper, and I'm going to reset the tool rest so that I can, you know, get in closer and just make sure that I've got more control. Again, checking to make sure I'm not touching. So we're going to go ahead and turn the lathe on. Again, just a refresher, we are spinning at just a little over 900 RPM. It's got a really good finish on it, so I think that that's a good speed. So I'm just going to try and do light passes, light pressure, and see if I can just even this out and get a really nice finish. Yeah, I think that might just have it. Alrighty. So now what we've got to do is get the sanding. It's the same process as before. I'm going to go through the grit starting with 150 and then go up to 220, 320, and then I'll apply a sanding sealer, 2 coats of that, and then I'll do a wet sand at 400, and a wet sand at 600, and that wet sand I'll be using walnut oil to go in and do that, and then I'll apply that beeswax, Carnarvon wax, and orange oil for that finish. I really enjoy that finish that it gives. Alrighty, so I'm just going to apply some to the rag to get it wet. A lot of times I'll just squirt it down into the bowl. Sometimes I find that easier. The only thing is you just want to try not to get the sanding sealer all over the place like I do most of the time. Just apply it here to the ring. So now I'm going to wet sand it with 400 and walnut oil. So I'll again turning the lathe on to about 700 RPM. Let's get a little bit of oil on the paper and just give it a good wet sand. Apply a little bit of oil, to keep the paper wet. It'll build up a little slurry, and it just gets it so smooth. Okay, so I'm going to do this with 400, and then I'm going to come back and do it with 600, and it only takes about 2 or 3 minutes, at the most 5, because it's already pretty smooth. We're just going in and just taking a little bit of whatever's left and get it that nice finish, that smooth finish. Okay, so now I'm just going to apply the beeswax. Again, going to do it with the lathe off, and then let it sit there for 20 minutes to absorb, and then just buff it out, and it's done. Pretty simple and straightforward. It usually takes me about an hour and a half to make a bowl from start to finish. I just applied this finish, and I'm going to let it sit for 20 minutes and then buff it out, and that'll conclude the video, and I will put some stills at the end. Thank you for stopping by. I look forward to the next time we turn together. Thank you.